Welcome to The Commute, a Bible study podcast designed to turn your commute into an opportunity to grow in your faith. Whether you're sure of what you believe or you're not sure what to believe, this podcast is designed to help you better understand who Jesus is, what the Bible's all about, and how that applies to your life today. I'm your host, Pastor Matt, and I'm excited to dive into this week's episode of The Commute. All right, well, hey, welcome to The Commute. I'm Pastor Matt.
And I'm Pastor Casey.
And this week, you guys are digging into the Gospel of Mark. And I love the Gospel of Mark. There's just so much good stuff in there with. And I think one of the things that was sticking out to me in Mark, a couple highlights. One, the storm, I think is really cool because in that storm, you see this scenario where everything's going really well in Jesus' ministry. And so the disciples, of course, are like, oh, God's totally in this. Then they find themselves caught in the middle of a storm. But in the middle of that storm, God's still in control. So it's like Mark's kind of setting the handle for a God that's in control when normally the rest of the world is out of control, which I think is such a cool thought. And then you step into Mark chapter 5, and you've got this story of Jesus healing a woman and Jairus' daughter. So I thought that'd be kind of fun for us to dig into as we're kind of looking at Mark. What do you think, Casey?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating story where you have kind of a sandwich with Jairus and his daughter as like the pieces of bread, and the contents of the sandwich are this unexpected woman. And you just get a really neat episode of Jesus while performing two different kinds of healing. And I think you see a lot of his heart and his character shine through in some unique ways. So I think it's something worth us talking about today.
That's awesome. Yeah. And you talked about that term sandwich. Were you referring to the Markian sandwiches that pop up kind of all over this gospel?
I suppose so. I guess the fancy word I heard for it in a class one time was like the intercalation of Mark 5, which is really just a pretend sophisticated way to say that there's a story going on, and then it seems to like take a break, another small story begins, and then the previous story picks back up. So yep, that happens here in Mark chapter 5.
So you can call it the intercorrelation, or you can call it a sandwich.
Take your pick. Up to you today.
So let's look at this sandwich today that we're going to be digging into. No, I love, I don't know. I love the term sandwich. It just kind of gives you this mental picture. But I think as you're reading through the gospel, look out for some of those sandwiches, because that can also kind of shed a little bit deeper meaning on what's going on. Because like sometimes you'll hit a section of scripture and it's kind of confusing. And, the Markian sandwich is just another way to kind of remind you about when you're reading the Bible, context is king. And so there might be things going on around that story that are going to help you better understand the story. And so in this case, it's really cool to see this story. So you've got Jairus, and he shows the ruler of the synagogue. And so he would have been in this small town, because Jesus did like 90% of his ministry in small towns. But he would have been in this small town, like one of the most important people in the town, the ruler of the synagogue. So he would have been somebody that everybody recognized, highly respected. He was the Pastor Casey of his day, as I like
that's taking it way too far. This guy would have been much more well known and well respected. Let's put it that way.
You could almost think about him like the mayor in your local town, like somebody that everybody kind of knows, has respect. So yeah, that's kind of Jairus. And so when Jairus comes to make this request, it's amazing what you see. Number one, so Jairus isn't even leveraging his status to say, hey, come help me, Jesus. He's humbling himself before Jesus, because he's just flat out desperate. In fact, I love the way it's translated here that, he implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." And I think anybody that has kids knows that it's always a lot more personal when it's your kids, and I think that's the quickest thing that makes a parent desperate is when there's something wrong with the kids. And so your heart goes out to them, right?
Yeah, totally does. Yeah, I put myself in his shoes and think that, yeah, I would do just about anything if one of my kids was at the point of death. And to know that Jesus is nearby makes a lot of sense, that he would approach him and really throw status and titles aside, and and say, yeah, lay your hands on her so that she could be made well and live. Um, yep.
Yeah. That's huge. And so I think what you're starting to see is, this is what everybody on the outside looking in is going is an important person in a time sensitive situation. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, you probably want to make sure that at the point of death doesn't turn into real death. This is the kind of scenario where, if this comes in across the dispatch, the 911 dispatch in town, they're sending all units as quickly as they can, right? They want to they want to do this fast. So Jesus goes with them.
That's huge. And Jesus goes with him, willingly. But what you have to understand in Mark too is that there's all these crowds that are just constantly around Jesus, because I mean he's teaching, he's healing. It's it's hard for him to break away from the crowd. And so here's this great crowd coming in. Everybody's crowding in. It's like shoulder to shoulder kind of. Think about like pre-COVID Times Square, that kind of like just packed in the city. You're going to some major event like the ball drop or, the Thanksgiving Day parade, and everybody's just pushed in tight to you. It's almost like you get the sense it's almost like a little bit uncomfortable how close everybody is. And as the crowd, it says a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, had suffered much under many physicians, and spent all that she had was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. I love that scene because here's Jairus. He's coming in. He's making his request known. All this kind of stuff. She is desperate, and she kind of realizes in the eyes of society maybe she doesn't even maybe feel worthy to like go over and say, "Hey Jesus, by the way," but she's like, "I just want to get close, I just want to reach out, I just want to kind of grab a hold," because she just knows if she can just get within touching distance of Jesus, something amazing is going to happen.
And there's really a stark contrast between this woman and Jairus. Jairus is a well respected, well known figure in town. He's a man who, on the surface, seems to have his life put together. Um, it appears he's got a family that's, I mean, to the average viewer would look like, yeah, this guy's got it made. But this guy has got a problem, and he comes to Jesus. Now contrast that with a woman who also has a problem. That's the similarity they share, but really she doesn't have a name, so we don't know her identity. What we know of her history is that it looks like it's a life that's really not put together very well. Yes, she's got this ailment, but it looks like she's even been a bit foolish in trying to fix it by means that just haven't been helpful. So you've got Jairus, who's got his life put together but still has a problem, and this woman whose life I imagine has really been well, just very very broken, and she's got this problem, and she's coming to Jesus. So yeah, I think you just see that there are two very different people both coming to Jesus and need his help, and watching Jesus react to them, I think is real gold.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like, you almost get this sense, like from a cultural perspective, from a worldly perspective, back then, even now today, you know, you expect Jesus to ignore the other issue and to go with the more prominent person, right? Just kind of keep pushing on, keep moving on, and just get the more important quote unquote job done. But this is where the story gets really neat. Uh, it says, she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. That's verse 28. And then 29, and immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? So Jesus stops. He stops this important thing he's doing, this time sensitive matter, this important person that he's with. He stops everything just dead in its tracks. And he says, who touched my garments? And the disciples are like, do you see the crowd? I mean, literally, that's, Matt's translation. The ESV says, and his disciples said, you see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, who touched me? They're everybody's touching you, Jesus. But it says, and he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. I think that's a really interesting detail, the like fear and trembling.
Yeah, and I've always kind of wondered about that. Like, is she like why is she afraid of what she had hoped would happen? Or what was she really just hoping that she could remain incognito, that like it could happen and that she could still remain hidden from Jesus? Like, oh, I'll just take a gamble and see if I touch him, and if something great happens, cool. If not, no big deal. Um, is she in fear and trembling because like it actually happened? Is she afraid that Jesus is going to reprimand her? I've always kind of wondered about that. But I love that Jesus immediately puts her at ease with his words. That Jesus doesn't come across um, as the perturbed healer who has been interrupted from doing a more important work, uh, but shows himself the compassionate and loving healer who is glad to declare to someone that they have been made well, and that their faith has healed them.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool point, Casey. I think she even sees herself as the inconvenience. And so now she's stopped Jesus from doing what he was supposed to do. And she's glad she's healed, but she's going before him in fear and trembling. And this is just us obviously projecting, you know.
Right.
But
Yep. Totally.
but I think sometimes it's a helpful exercise to step back and to think, to remember they were living in real lives in a real cultural context, and they were coming to a real God because they had real needs. And so it's interesting to see kind of her reaction. But this is what I love. He looks at her and says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed. Like Jesus stops, not out of inconvenience, but out of love, because he just wants her to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that she found the healing she was looking for in Jesus. And I think that's cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. I also think another cool aspect of this is how unhurried Jesus is. That he's really in a 911 kind of scenario with someone's daughter at the point of death, and he's got the time for this woman that has no name, um, and speaks to her. Uh, our world tends to feel pretty hurried and frazzled, and sometimes I find myself moving at a pace from one thing to another that probably isn't very healthy. And I look at Jesus and how he moves from episode to episode, and I'm really just astounded by, yep, Jesus is in control of all things and is making it happen exactly how he wants to. So he's going to take it in the timing that he believes is best. And for me, that's kind of an opportunity just to step back and breathe and realize that we don't need to live in such a hurry either. That it's possible to take things at a pace that values people of all of all needs, of all backgrounds. So I guess this is also an encouragement to me to just step back and evaluate how I use the time that I've been given. So that's kind of an aside. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole anymore, but that was just something that popped into my head.
No, I think it's a good thing, especially because we've kind of had this forced slowdown for so long. This time where we've been forced to slow down. And I think even in how we use that slowdown, I know sometimes I've used it well, and I'm like, man, I've used that time well. And other times I've just kind of filled my time with other things, and the fact that Jesus like slows down and fills the time with intentional relationship. He's not in a hurry. Schedule. He's on God's schedule, which I think is huge. And that is a tension and a challenge. That's probably, yeah, and you're right, probably a conversation for another day, because all of a sudden it comes back to the story of Jairus, right? Because it's a sandwich, right? Mm-hmm. And so now we're coming back to that other story. And it says, while he was still speaking, there came the ruler's house someone who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" And this is amazing. It says Jesus overhears it. So I don't know how he's saying it. Maybe he's saying it in a way where it's like, "Hey, bud, bad news. Let's go. Let's not make a scene." But Jesus overhears it and says to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And so I think it's kind of cool, because I think there's moments where we're active to follow through when things into our understanding of how God could do something. Our timeline, our priority list, our understanding of what's possible and not possible. And when things go outside that, we're like, oh, I guess God can't do it. And that's where I love Jesus's encouragement here. Do not fear, only believe. Do not fear, only believe. And then Jesus goes in and he heals the daughter in the midst of the commotion. And I think that's just so cool. Even the phrase he uses in 41, taking her by the hand, he said, "Talitha kumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Like, there's just this tenderness in Jesus too, and how he does. It's like just conscious of the fact that this is a little child.
Yeah, I mean, this is also doing a bit more projecting, but knowing that Jesus is God, he could have chosen to perform this healing any way he wanted. He could have, just stretched out his hands and like zapped her or something like that. He could have, had thunder come down or something like that.
But that picture's going to stick with me, Casey, for a lifetime.
Welcome.
Boom, like Frankenstein style healing, right?
Yeah, he could do it like that, but he instead chooses to take the girl by the hand and raise her up. And I agree with you. I think the tenderness of Jesus really comes through in a remarkable way. And I think you see a lot of Jesus' heart and character come through, and just how compassionate he has been now with these two women that he's healed. Um, I love a picture of God that feels so real. And I mean, this is like the beauty of Christianity and like the beauty of the incarnation is we say that God came down and God became human and did that so that we might have a clearer depiction that leads to a clearer understanding of who God is and what he's all about. I think this set of stories here gives us a really cool opportunity to know Jesus. I'm just really struck by his actions.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love that. And I think is this is the process that we would call just simply meditating on scripture, which is sometimes I think even when we're doing our reading plan and stuff, and this may not be true for everybody. I know this is true for me at times. I kind of move from one thing to the next very quickly. And it's like sometimes we don't even take time to just stop and process. And I think sometimes it's really helpful to think of reading the scriptures as almost like a hard candy, like it's just past Halloween, right? So candy still might be in some homes. I've had to throw away a bunch because otherwise I just eat it all day long, like zero willpower, but that's another story for another time. But you've got some that are like chocolates that you just kind of eat, and then you get a hard candy, and the idea behind a hard candy is not to bite down and get rid of it as fast as possible, but to really just kind of put it in your mouth and like savor it, right? And the more it's in there, the more the flavor starts to kind of unlock and go in. And that's kind of like scripture. Sometimes we're trying to truck through it so fast that we don't give it that time to just soak in, to meditate, which is just simply to think about it, to let it go over and over in our mind. So that'd be kind of my encouragement to you is just, what Pastor Casey and I did is just that process of just kind of slowing down. Nothing special. We didn't pull open commentaries to figure out what was going on in the first century or anything like that. We just kind of slowed down and looked at something you could very easily do when you're reading through the scriptures as you do this kind of commute reading plan.
Yeah, I find it to be a really fun and helpful way to engage with God's word.
That's awesome. Well, that's all we've got on Mark, y'all. It's been fun to hang out with you right here on the Commute. If you'd like more content, more ways to dive in, we'd encourage you jump on the Bethlehem Church Live mobile app. That's Bethlehem Church Live mobile app. You can also go to bethlehemchurch.live or our Bethlehem Church Live YouTube page. So if that's not enough places to look, and if you get confused, just type in Bethlehem Church Live and you will find us somewhere. But it's been a joy hanging out with you this week and looking forward to hanging out with you next week right here on The Commute. Thanks for checking out this episode of The Commute. For more information on The Commute or to join the Commute Bible reading plan, simply download the Bethlehem Church Live mobile app or go to bethlehemchurchlive.com/thecommute.